Anyway, last time we start talking about the tissues. We covered most of the tissues, and we start. Well, I kind of covered a little bit of the system, specifically the ones which we will be covering during that particular class. So one of the very important things is the homeostasis whenever we're talking about the physiology. And basically, as soon as we start looking at several cells combining together, they have to interact with each other and maintain the internal environment. And this is what homeostasis is. The internal environment within the organism stay more or less the same. Yes, it's changing within the certain parameters or within a certain range, but generally it stays the same. And that particular thing known as a dynamic consistency. Dynamic, what does it mean? It changes. Right now, my cells, for example, I'll stop breathing for a little while. My cells will continue to produce carbon dioxide, so the levels of carbon dioxide will start increasing in my blood, while the levels of oxygen will start decreasing. So in order to overcome, or if I'll start exercising, the carbon dioxide muscles will start working more, carbon dioxide will be increasing. As a result, the organism will send the specific signals to the different systems to speed it up the heart, to increase my breathing, and so on and so forth. So it will counteract, and we'll talk about two major ways how this particular feedback occurs, so to speak. But once again, homeostasis is maintaining the internal environment, more or less the same, essential for life. As soon as we'll start seeing the changes within the homeostasis above those particular ranges, we start talking about literally multiple organ failures and eventually death. All right, so negative feedback. There is two ways how the organism, how different cells are reporting, and then of course how the organism respond. Negative feedback is the most common way, and then of course there is a positive feedback. So basically, negative feedback, when something is increasing, the other thing, depending on that, will start decreasing. Of course, the changing conditions will be detected by the sensors. Therefore, the information would be fed to the integrated sensors. Again, remember, we have sensors, and then there will be centers which have to process those particular signals, such as brain generally. And then compares the conditions. This is what the integrated center does. There is the range. If it's above the range, below the range, it will act appropriately. If the conditions deviate too far from the set range, there will be some sort of response. All right. So in this particular case, the response will be to lower down or increase, whatever it is. So the conditions will go back to the set point. Like I said, with the oxygen, if I have a too low of oxygen, my brain will say, hey, not enough oxygen, let's start the procedure to start circulating the blood faster and then breathing deeper. On an opposite side, if I have way too much of oxygen infusing my blood, then my circulation will slow down a little bit, and then of course the breathing will become more shallow. Kind of makes sense? So make sure you understand that. And I'll talk a little bit about the negative feedback. Once again, most of our homeostasis maintaining by the negative feedback. Later on, we'll talk about the negative feedback when we'll talk about the hormones as well. And most of the hormones, most of the communication through the hormones based on the negative feedback. Not all. There will be some of the positive based on the positive feedback as well. So keep that in mind. All right. There is two major feedback points. So components of the negative feedback. Set points are extremely important. Temperature, oxygen, yes, sugar levels, and so on and so forth. And once again, those particular set points are set in the centers, and then we have receptors which will collect all of those information and will send into integrated center to compare. And then depending what's going on, if it's too high or too low, there will be effectors, usually muscles or glands, which will start changing something in order to go back to the set point. My body temperature increased too much. What's going to happen? I will start sweating to lower down my overall temperature, right? My blood, my capillaries in the skin will start opening it up, so the heat will be escaping my body. On the reverse, right now, it's kind of, this morning was a little bit chilly. So what will happen if my body core temperature start dropping down? Well, the organism will preserve the body core temperature, so it will close down those capillaries in the skin. I will start shivering. What shivering is basically muscles start contracting almost uncontrollably. Therefore, when they're contracting, they're producing extra heat, right? So all of those are part of the maintaining the homeostasis. So in this particular case, let's take a look. Deviation from the set point, of course, would be sensed by the sensors, and sensors are sending the information to the integrated center. From the integrated center, it will send to the effector, and then the response will occur. So in this particular case, let's say sensor sense that my temperature is too high. It will send the signals, everything, and the integrated center will send the information to the effector, so to compensate negatively. If my temperature is too high, it will not send the sensors to start increasing the temperature. It will send the sensor to decrease the temperature, right? A very good kind of common household example of the negative feedback control is the toilet bowl. You can say, how the toilet is the, whenever you're flushing, what happens? The water starts rushing into the tank, right? More, and then there is a floater, so more water is coming, floater coming up, and then it's closing down. So more water will stop the water from coming in, right? Otherwise, well, if you have it, if everything works properly, if not, then you will overflow the bowl. But generally, that's the negative feedback. More of something will decrease of something else. So on the opposite side, while the positive feedback, more of something will increase, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. So in mammals and birds, like endothermic, basically warm-blooded creatures. So warm-blooded creatures, we are trying to stay within somewhere around 37 degrees. And then, of course, there is a possibilities that that particular temperature will be increasing or decreasing for a variety of reasons. The outside, how you're clothes, if you have an infection. Right now we're going in all kinds of places and they checking, like I went at the beginning of the semester with my kid to the doctor's office, and he was okay, just the usual checkup for his athletics. So whenever we were coming in, they checked the temperature. Why? To make sure that we are at about 37.6 to 36.6 degrees Celsius. 37 is already kind of a little bit high. 37.5 is considered to be a higher temperature, meaning that there is something going on in the body. And then there is, of course, the part hypothalamus. We'll talk about the hypothalamus. It's a very important part of the brain where many of the sensors, especially internal sensors, sending the signals. But birds, pretty much the same thing. So opposition of the negative feedback, once again, they are opposite. So push-pull action, we already talked a little bit about that. Antagonistic effect. So here we have a stimulus. So in this particular case, sensors detect the changes, right, in the temperature. Integrated set point 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is basically how we have those particular thermostat works. So thermostat compared to the set point, and then either will turn AC or will turn turn the AC or will turn the furnace on. So also a negative feedback, exactly the same kind of idea we have in our body. Set at 37 degrees. If we have the neurons checking out, if below the point, the blood vessels will contract in the skin, muscles will start contracting, shivering, body temperature raises. So increasing of that, decrease of that, negative feedback, right? And same thing will happen on this side as well. So positive feedback. Positive feedback, not as common, but yes, it's happening quite often. Blood clotting, contraction of the uterus during the childbirth, all of that, well, that one is purely hormonal, and basically more contractions, there is a specific hormones, more contractions, more of those particular hormones will be produced, more contractions they will produce. Or there is another one, which is like internet right now. You're going pretty much anywhere and you'll find some sort of cute animals, kittens all over the internet, right? And the puppies and the funny polar bears and so on and so forth. Why? Why do we have so many pictures and short videos which going viral about those particular creatures? Positive feedback. Whenever we see something cute, and that particular thing known as the cuteness, what the cute is, it's basically a chemical reaction in your brain. More you see it, more you are more positive hormones, so to speak, dopamine and then oxytocin will be produced. As a result, technically, you kind of hooked up on that. And some people browsing. Same thing with the if you have any pets like a cat or a dog or both of those. So the seeing, and we'll talk a little bit more about the positive feedback and the hormones when we'll discuss the endocrine system. We'll discuss something which known as the love as the feeling. But basically the dogs as well as the cat are producing a positive feedback in our brain. So whenever you are petting the dog or the cat and the cat start purring, it will produce more you purring, more particular hormone, happiness will be produced. So, and same thing with the blood clotting. And we'll talk about the blood clotting when we'll discuss the circulatory system, but the main idea is the amount of oxygen. More oxygen blood has in contact with a free oxygen, more clots will form. All right, so positive versus negative. So a stimulus, and then there will be a sensors. Sensors will integrate, well, of course, will send the signal to the integration center, and then the effector, if they're above the point, oxytocin released. Oxytocin will increase the force against the uterus, promoting the birth of the baby. Or the same thing, oxytocin is also important in the perception of the baby. Whenever we'll see a big eye, big-headed creatures, basically the babies, not necessarily human babies, but the puppies and the kittens, some of the oxytocin will be produced as well, creating that particular oxytocin and dopamine, creating that particular feeling of warm and cuteness and fuzziness inside of us. More we see it, more cute it will be, so to speak. Then the regulating of body temperature, we kind of talk about that because once again, temperature is extremely important. And there is several steps. Some of the organisms can regulate as us, some of them depends on the environment. So temperature sensitivity, don't really have to worry about the formula, but basically for every 10 degrees increase in temperature, the reaction rates doubles, what kind of reactions? Well, think about it. We have tons of different reactions, chemical reactions going on in our body. Essentially, we are a walking, talking, breathing chemical reaction bags, or bags full of chemical reactions. So in order for the chemical reaction to go at the certain speed, you have to have a specific temperature. Higher the temperature, faster the reaction occurs. That's one of the reasons why we as humans maintaining at 37, why dogs are maintaining their body a little bit higher than 37 degrees or 36.6 degrees Celsius. Why? Because our body, our set of reactions are tuned up to that particular temperature, 37. As soon as we'll go higher, anybody had a high fever before? 38, 39, you're feeling, ugh. Why? Because our chemical reactions are not going as appropriate as they should. And of course, at about 42 degrees, at about 40 to 41, you're kind of wishing to die. And about 42, 42 and a half body temperature extended. Not like, oh, I just heated up at 42 and I'm dead. No, no. But at around 42, some of the proteins, extended period of time, couple of, well, 30 minutes to an hour, some of the proteins will start denaturing in our body. Yet for the dog, that's a normal temperature. Actually, a little bit on the lower end. So temperature determination. So we figured it out that the temperature overall is important for the reactions in the body. So overall metabolic, what metabolism? All of the combination of all of the reactions in your body. So it is extremely important. But once again, some of those particular reactions will produce energy in form of heat. So as a result, metabolic rate and the body temperature are interrelated. More metabolism happening, higher the temperature will be. Whenever you're exercising, you're burning those calories. What does it mean? It means that you are increasing your metabolic rate, especially like a cardio, right? What does it mean? That the heart is start pumping much faster than usual, and also you technically all of your, well, many of your skeletal muscles are working at the certain degree. So the body temperature rises up, so we start sweating to lower down the body temperature. So body heat, metabolism, and then the environment, of course. A couple of years ago, let me see, 2015, I would say, maybe 17. Me and kids were doing the road trip during the summer, and we ended up in one of the, well, it's a lowest part in United States, a very interesting national park not far from Area 51, known as the Death Valley. Yes, I took these kids to the Death Valley without my wife. So yeah, both of them survived. Everything is fine. It's a very interesting place. If you'll have a chance to go, it's like on the border between the California. It's actually on the California side, but it's a border between the Nevada and the California. It's about 2 hours of driving from Las Vegas toward the California. So anyway, there I saw a very interesting thing. One of the most grueling marathons, right? Running 42 kilometers, 26.5 miles in the Death Valley during the summer. There was several people were running, but whenever they were running completely dressed, and basically completely dressed in white to reflect as much sun as possible. And the reason, well, the whole marathon was quite interesting. I stopped by, I talked to the people. Basically, they have a camp, and the people running for about 30 minutes or so, and then the runner will literally collapse on the cot right there in the in the shaded area in the camp, so to speak, and they will drink some. They will cool off a little bit more, because once again, the environment has already extremely high temperature. When we were there, it was about 125 degrees Fahrenheit. Whenever I was talking to the locals, and they said, it's not today is kind of cloudy, so not too hot. I'm like, 125 is pretty hot, and of course it's a dry heat. So in this particular case, body heat is a heat produced and heat transferred, where it will be transferred from the environment. Same thing, like body heat, heat produced, our body producing heat. But what if we have a very low temperature outside? Remember Titanic? People were getting into the water and they were dying. Why they were dying? Not because they could not swim. Many of them had the swimming, those particular life vests, but they were dying from hypothermia, lower temperature. In that particular frigid water, the human will survive for about 10-15 minutes tops. All right. So mechanisms of heat transfer, that's basically a little bit of physics: radiation, conduction, convection, and evaporation. Radiation, transferred by electromagnetic radiation. Whenever you're standing outside in the sun, you can feel the heat coming out. That's the radiation. Now, conduction, from hotter object to another, and they have to have a direct transfer. You grab something hot, let's say a skillet, and they start transferring, your hands start burning. That's the conduction. Now, convection, transfer heat through the movement of gas or liquid. If I'll right now jump into the pool, the water is kind of colder, definitely colder than my body, so the heat will be transferred by the convection. Same thing, convection is used whenever we're cooling off or heating up our houses. And then the evaporation, heat of vaporization needed to change them from liquid to gas. So this is why we are sweating, because there is some energy which will produce, well, which will be required to take the sweat on our surface and evaporate it. You probably also, whenever you're coming out of the shower, for example, you feel a little bit cold. Why? Because the water from the shower will start evaporating from your body, taking some of that particular heat away from you. So those particular 4 major mechanisms of heat transfer, and usually we have all 4 of them working out with us. So here we have a picture which depicts the same thing. Ectotherms and endotherms. Ectotherms, cold-blooded creatures. Cold-blooded creatures, their temperature more or less depends on the environment. For example, here we're looking at the, well, moth, right, the butterfly. Well, whenever the butterfly, let's say the temperature outside at about 25 degrees, well, 24, I guess, 24 degrees Celsius. And in this particular case, as you can see, until it will start actively moving, specifically using its muscles to produce extra heat, the temperature will stay within the environment. And then as soon as it will start kind of flapping its wings, the muscles will produce heat, and you will see the temperature is definitely increasing. All right. For the endotherms, on another hand, basically we have more or less stable environment, specifically stable temperature. We are exercising, our temperature stays at about 37. There will be some mechanism which will be turned on to maintain that particular temperature, not to go up or to go down. But in this particular case, blood flow is one of the extremely important part, and we are talking about counter-current exchange. And this particular picture shows you the warm blood and then the cold blood. That would be a capillary bed. So in this particular case, what we'll have, the warm blood coming in from the essentially heart, the arteries, blood vessels taking out from the heart. So in this case, what happened? The warm blood will be warming up pretty much everything around, and the cold blood will be moving away back into the warm core of the creature. As a matter of fact, if it becomes too cold, those particular veins will get constricted, so less cold blood will be flowing in. Body size and insulation, extremely important. So something which known as a mouse versus elephant curve. Bigger the size, metabolic rate is decreasing. It's basically surface and the volume ratio. Very, very important. Smaller animals will consume much more energy per gram of body, for example, or per kilogram of body in order to survive. Smaller they are, more often they have to feed, because once again, metabolic rates versus size are non-proportional. Let's actually it's a reverse proportion. We'll see right here. So elephant, you see, mass specific metabolic rate. In this particular case, larger the creature, less metabolic rate is. And smaller the creature, mouse or shrew specifically, those insectivores, they are pretty much constantly hungry. They constantly have to eat. Elephant can survive one day without the food, no problem. Shrew will not be able to survive one day. It will die because of the energy requirements for that particular creature. Kind of makes sense, hopefully. And then thermoregulations, again, we talk about the hypothalamus. The neurons in the hypothalamus will will detect the temperature change. Also, there is quite a large amount of blood flowing through the hypothalamus, and also there is the temperature sensors located throughout the body. And then we'll have a peripheral vessel either dilation or decreasing, depending if you have too high of the temperature, and sweating will be, or heat promoting, so heat losing and heat promoting center. Thermogenesis, creation of the heat. How? Contract the muscles, shivering. Constriction of the blood vessels, we were talking about that. Epinephrine will be produced by the adrenal glands to make sure that the heart is beating a little bit faster, and so on and so forth. All right, so here we have some of those particular things. And again, hypothalamus is very important part, tiny little bit, and then there will be a pituitary gland, and we'll talk about that when we'll discuss the endocrine system. So in this particular case, again, all of that is the negative feedback control. All right. So, and that basically it for that part of the lecture. Let me pull it out, the next one. Here we go. So digestive system. Digestive system, and we already discussed the digestive system a little bit when we were talking about the animals. So types of the digestive system. Type of the digestive system, we're talking about heterotrophs versus carnivores, and then of course the omnivores. Make sure you will understand that. Heterotrophs are the creatures which have to consume someone else. So in this particular case, technically, all of the heterotrophs are predators. Yes, so you see the cow, yes, vicious predator. Even though it's eating, it's consuming the other organism, and that's predominantly plants. So we're calling them the herbivores. And then, of course, well, I have a dog somewhere there laying on the floor, I think, yes. So in this particular case, the dog is the carnivores, predominantly eat other animals. So plants and animals, depending what they are diet is. And then finally, omnivores, so three major groups. Omnivores have a balanced diet between the kind of switching between the plant and the animal as well. Sometimes people asking me, students asking me, well, I saw my cat eating plants. Is it a herbivore? I mean, it's chewing on the grass, for example. No. Generally, cat considered to be a carnivore. It's predominantly hunting and consuming other animals. It's eating the grass to stabilize its digestion or what have you. Maybe it didn't really like that particular blade of grass or whatever. So carnivores will generally have the digestive system accommodated to consume or to break down the animal proteins, while the herbivores will have the digestive system designed or designed by nature, God, whichever, to digest plant, to make sure that nutrients from the plant will be absorbed. And then the omnivores can do both somewhat. So let's say if we'll put a cat who already ate one blade of grass into a completely plant diet, we will be feeding as much hay as well as the grass as possible. What will happen to the cat? It will die because it does not have a specific enzymes to break down the cellulose. Yes, occasionally can eat it, but generally we're talking about the carnivores are adopted to digest, to break down the animal products, animal fats, animal proteins, and so on. So in this particular case, some people asking me, what about vegans? I'm like, what about them? Well, we are omnivores, and then there is the people who are vegetarian. And if you are, that's wonderful. But make sure you understand that you have to have a quite variety in your diet. You cannot just eat, well, I will be vegan and I will be eating only corn. For example, I'm simplifying it, but or I really like bananas, so I will be eating only bananas for my entire life. Well, your life will not be very long. Why? Because you will develop malnutrition, since bananas do not have all of the essential nutrients required for our organism to prosper. So if you are leaning toward vegetarians or specifically veganism, you need to be careful with what you're consuming, because in animals, like for example, if you're getting a piece of meat, a chicken or fish, you're getting all of the amino acids, specifically amino acids which our body requires. If you're eating only beans, you will not get all of the amino acids from there. But I'll digress. So let's start with the digestive systems. Digestive system, first of all, we talk about the intracellular digestion. Intracellular digestion, the one which happens inside of the cell. All right. Well, remember the amoeba will have the pseudopods, will engulf the bacteria, will produce some enzymes into that particular food vacuole, digesting it, and whatever is being digested will go around the cytoplasm, feeding the cytoplasm of the cell. This is what happens in the single cell protist as well as in the sponges. They do not have something which is known as extracellular digestion as we have. They have the intracellular only. Do we have intracellular digestion? Yes, some of our cells, think about white blood cell. White blood cell sends some sort of bacteria, comes in, engulf the bacteria and kills it. How? By digesting it. That's a part of the intracellular digestion. But most of our nutrients we do not get by the intracellular digestion. We have extra outside of the cell digestion, which means what? We have some sort of food cavity or digestive cavity. The cavity where food goes, our cells producing a valley of different enzymes which will attack or break down that particular food. And then that particular smaller units, remember polymers like a protein, chains of amino acids. We have a special enzymes which will digest that particular protein, break it down from the huge chain into a smaller amino acids. Amino acids will move on into the cells, and then the cells will start sharing it with other cells. This is what essentially Hydra does. Extracellular digestion within the digestive cavity. It's not within the cells. The inside of the organism, there is a cavity, and the enzymes will be sent into those particular cavities. 1 or 7. So cnidarians and flatworms have a gastrovascular cavity. It's basically the mouth and the anus at the same place, meaning that the food goes in, digested, whatever is not digested will be thrown up. It's a sac, one opening, no specialized regions, all right? But that was the beginning. Next part, of course, worms, well, we kind of talk about the traveling anus and antennophores, but essentially nematodes, the roundworms. Remember, we had flatworms, and then the nematodes are roundworms combined or come up with the tube mouth. The food goes through the tube, and then whatever is not digested comes out from the other end, so to speak. Tubular gut. And this is what started it all. Rest of the animals will have, in one way, in some cases, much more complex than just a tube, but essentially it's a tube with one end. The food goes through the digestive tract, and whatever is not digested comes out from the other end. So here we have, remember the ascaris? Yes, the internal parasites, which some of the creatures might have, and by the way, yes, hook, so that's a male, right? So in this particular case, we're looking mouth, the food goes in the intestine. We'll have what? Most of the absorption, well, digestion, most of the digestion and most of the absorption will happen in the intestine. Then we'll have, of course, the earthworm, which has a little bit more complex digestive system. Now we have a mouse, and then there is a pharynx, and then there is a crop and a gizzard, kind of part of the stomach, which are breaking down food into smaller particles, increasing the surface area of the food. And the increasing of the surface area, and that's a chemistry 101, when you are increasing the surface area, the reaction goes faster. So smaller pieces will be digested faster than the larger pieces. That's why you probably heard that you need to chew your food. Why? Whenever you're chewing, whenever you're masticating your food, you're breaking down into smaller pieces. Smaller pieces will have a larger surface area. Larger surface area will be digested faster. Woohoo! So, and the salamander or vertebrates, we have now mouth, there is a stomach, and then there is the intestines, several of them, or one, and then there are cloaca. This is where the liquid and the solid waste come in. Oh, here we go, the doggy came in. And then it will be expelled through the anus. So whatever is not digested. And we'll talk a little bit more, of course, about the accessory organs such as liver and pancreas and what they do. But again, most of the digestion and most of the absorption of the nutrients happens where? Intestine, not in the stomach. Some of the students have that particular misconception that food will get into the stomach and this is where it will be digested, and the intestine just for the elimination. Nope. Most of the digestion is actually happens in the small intestine in humans, and most of the absorption of the nutrients, and we'll discuss that. So passage of food, or we can say that the overall digestion will be subdivided into several major steps. Ingested, you need to get the food into that particular tube, so to speak. And then, of course, domestication occurs, breakdown, physical fragmentation in order to increase the surface area. Higher the surface area, faster the digestion. Now, chemical digestion, what exactly it is? The organism will produce tons of different enzymes, which will help to break down the polysaccharides into a monosaccharides, the large molecules into a small molecules. The fats will be broken down into the fatty acids and the glycerin, right? And then, of course, the proteins will be broken down into amino acids, and then the DNA, RNA into a nucleotides. Here's the trick, though. Well, first of all, hydrolysis. Where you're supposed to talk about the something which known as the enzymatic hydrolysis during the bio 1, but hydrolysis, we have a chain of protein. So whenever the enzyme comes in to break it down, it will introduce something which known as the water molecule, right? That's why it's called hydrolysis. That's one of the reasons why water is extremely important for pretty much all the living creatures. So hydrolysis reaction, breaking down with the help of water and the enzyme. Now, trick is, if an organism, a specific organism, have a specific enzyme to break down that particular protein, they will be able to digest it, or polysaccharide or fat. If they do not have that enzyme, there will be no proper digestion occurring. Let's say hairs, right? Hair, as you know, made out of proteins, keratin specifically. And I'm grossly exaggerating, but let's say I decide, well, I want to be on a protein diet, so I will be eating only hairs. Yeah, I know, nasty. Oh, and I will add it up the nails to that, because, you know, some people biting the nails, and I had a student before arguing with me, like, well, I'm consuming proteins. I'm like, yeah, you are, indeed, it is a protein. I don't have a problem with that, but you are just not really consuming, because those particular, our organism, human body, do not have enzyme to break down keratin, meaning you eating hairs, you chewing down everything nice, you can eat as much hair as possible. It goes in, goes through the digestive system, goes out, unchanged, unbroken, undigested. If it's not digested, it cannot be absorbed. Therefore, the person who is only eating hairs, for example, will die from what? From starvation. Same thing with, let's say, we have a cow and a human being. We're feeding cow with the fresh grass and a human being with the fresh grass. Okay, not a grass. Let's go with something which we are actually eating, like cauliflower and the green stuff, well, the broccoli. Here we go. And we'll add celery to it. So we have a cow who is on the diet of cauliflower, broccoli, and the celery, and a human being who is on the same diet, cauliflower, broccoli, and celery, and the cucumbers, what have you, and the watermelons. Well, let's keep it with the cucumbers. Now, what will happen to the cow? The herbivore eating herbs, everything is fine. Cow's digestive system is designed to break down cellulose, which is a major carbohydrate in those particular products. Humans, on the other hand, can eat as much as those things as possible, and they will be losing their weight, dropping down. Add cabbage to that, fine. Cabbage too. So in this particular case, the human will start losing weight, and eventually he or she will die from starvation. They can eat as much of raw or steamed broccoli as they want to, but they will still be dying from starvation. Why? Because our organisms do not have the specific enzyme which will go and start breaking down cellulose. The cow does. Well, not entirely cow, the microorganism in the cow digestive system can help them with breaking down. So once again, in order to digest, you have to have a very specialized enzyme. You probably heard about something which known as lactose intolerance. Some people are lactose intolerant. You're not supposed to have milk, right? Why? Very simple. Lactose is a specific sugar, galactose and the glucose combined together. It's a disaccharide. And most of us have a specific enzyme which goes and break down those particular monosaccharides, and those monosaccharides goes into our blood stream. Circulating 80% of the glucose will be broken down in your brain. Brain is a power-hungry thingy, organ. So in this particular case, what will happen to the people who are lactose intolerant? They don't have that particular enzyme, or they produce not enough of that enzyme. As a result, that particular disaccharide goes where? Into the intestine, a small intestine, and then large intestine. And what do we have in the large intestine? Bacteria. Gut flora, so to speak. And that particular bacteria getting sugar, and what the bacteria will do if it's getting sugar, it's getting food, it starts reproducing really, really quickly. Ta-da! Upset stomach. Technically, it's not upset stomach, it's upset intestines, but in this particular case, it might result in the gas, diarrhea, all that particular stuff. So not a very pleasant. Why? Just because they don't have, or they're lacking, or don't have enough enzyme to break down the milk sugar, the sugar which is located in the milk. That's why if you have, and my father-in-law is lactose intolerant, anytime he wants the coffee with the milk, we have to go and buy him a different type of milk. It's called lactate. Not advertising, but in a lactate, he can drink that particular milk. It tastes like a milk, a little bit sweeter, by the way. If you'll taste it comparatively to the regular milk, the lactate typically tastes it a little bit sweeter because they already added those enzymes to break down the lactose into I think it's a galactose and the fructose. No, galactose and the glucose together. So they already been broken. So he will not develop that particular problem with the lactose intolerance because technically there is no lactose no more in there. All right. After its hydrolysis occurs, the products goes through the epithelial and they will be absorbed again from the large molecules, macromolecules, huge proteins, etc. cannot be absorbed directly. They have to be broken down through the process of hydrolysis, and only after that they can go and be absorbed. Now, what will happen if we consume something which we cannot break down? That would be a waste, which will be excreted from the digestive system through the other end, the anus, right? So in this particular case, let's say you are eating, you went somewhere in a restaurant and they usually serve you a salad and then, I don't know, a chicken or fish or steak, whichever you prefer, with some sort of side of, I don't know, fried French fries, whatever, rice. So in this particular case, what will happen? Pretty much all of the salad which you are eating, leaves, they are not digestible by our digestive system. You can say why we are eating them, because they're important in something which is known as dietary fiber. Dietary fiber essentially is a cellulose. Cellulose makes paper. Would I consume the paper? No, not really, but yes, if you need some dietary fiber, you might want to, well, you don't want to eat piece of paper, but there is a special tablets which contain that particular dietary fiber. Dietary fiber is a cellulose. We are not digesting cellulose, but it helps with the excretion, formation of the feces, fecal masses. So now let's kind of go over the vertebrate digestive system. So again, it consists of the tube, and then we have the entry of that particular tube, mouth and the pharynx, and basically this is where the food tube, well, actually the air tube and the food tube, windpipe, and the esophagus will split in the pharynx. And then there is the esophagus. It's basically a tube which takes the food from the mouth and moves it to the stomach. Stomach has a highly acidic, oh, speaking of which, let's kind of go over the pH. I should actually have a slightly different colors. So mouth have a slightly basic pH. Remember, from 0 to 7 considered to be acidic, 7 is neutral, from 7 to 14, and I'm going the classical pH scale. I know there is a possibility to have a negative pH and above 14. We're not going there. After all, it's not chemistry. But in this particular case, so everything below 7 considered to be acidic, everything above 7 considered to be basic, 7 is neutral. So our mouth has a slightly basic pH, around like 7.5 to 8. So our saliva has the basic pH. Then moving to the stomach, stomach has a hydrochloric acid, highly acidic pH, somewhere around 1 or 2. The digestive juices in the stomach is very, very acidic. And every time you're going from one, like let's say from 7 to 6, how more, well, of course, pH is a power of hydrogen, concentration of the hydrogen ions in the solution. So how much time? From 7 to 6, 10 times more. From 7 to 5, 100 times more. Every time you're going one step down, you are multiplying it by 10. Or when you're going up, you're multiplying it by 10. So anyway, then in stomach, preliminary digestion, and this is where the proteins will start to digest. And then, of course, the highly acidic environment kills most of the bacteria and fungi, and God knows what we swallow. Not all of them, but most of them. You might heard about salmonella poisoning, right? Or salmonella. Those particular products like spinach leaves has been recalled by the manufacturer because they had the salmonella. What salmonella does? It's a bacteria, quite common bacteria as a matter of fact. And whenever it gets into the stomach, it dies. So you can say, well, if it dies, how it's producing that particular poisoning? Very simple. Salmonella has endotoxins, the toxins inside of that particular bacteria. So whenever the bacteria dies, in the last kind of act of vengeance and saying, okay, well, you killing me, I'll send the toxins to you. So have a wonderful stomach pains now, because tons of bacteria dying out, releasing those toxins into the stomach. You will end up with upset stomach, and in some cases it can lead to death. So, but in this particular case, stomach has a highly acidic pH. Then the food, now it's called chyme. It's basically the food which has been chewed up, and now it's mixed with the stomach content, that particular semi-liquid stuff going into a small intestine. Small intestine, this is where most of the digestion, proteins, fats, as well as the carbohydrates, specifically the complex carbohydrates, will be digested, and then they will be absorbed. Carbohydrates can be absorbed straight in the mouth, or they will start the digestion in the mouth. We have a special enzyme in the saliva which will help with the digestion of the of the carbohydrates. So small intestine responsible for most of the digestion and most of the absorption. And then the large intestine, absorption of water and minerals. So all of the nutrients, again, important, please remember, most of the digestion as well as most of the absorption of the nutrients happened in the small intestine. It's called small diameter wise. It's the longest part of the intestine in the human body. This is where digestion and consecutive absorption occurs. Large intestine, basically a formation of the fecal masses, absorption of water and minerals. Also, this is where we have our gut flora, means bacteria typically, and this is where the bacteria will be feeding of whatever we were unable to digest, and they will provide us with the vitamins, specifically vitamin K. All right, so it's a tit for tat relationship. It's called mutualism. They live inside of us, we're feeding them, and they providing us with something we need, like a vitamin K. And then rectum, expel the waste. Complex, compressing and then expelling of the waste. That's for the mammals, birds, as well as the reptiles, and amphibians have a cloaca. Cloaca is basically the part of the large intestine, the lower part of the large intestine, where the liquid waste will be open there as well. So it's kind of mixing it up. If you ever seen the bird's poop, it's semi-liquid, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. It's one of the forms of preservation of water, but they have there is no bird pee, right? Speaking of which, reptiles do the same thing. Anybody knows why nobody heard pterodactyl to pee? And because pee is a silent. Pterodactyl, the flying creature. Yeah, I know. 12-year-old brought me that particular joke. I kept. So here we have salivary glands, which will provide saliva, which with the mucus, as well as some of the enzymes to kill some of the bacteria. Then, of course, moisturize the food. So later on, it will be slowly and nicely sliding down the esophagus, and then the esophagus will connect it with the stomach. You see, this is the liver. Liver is the largest internal organs. It's something which is known as an accessory organ, and we'll talk about that. It plays some of the function in the digestion of fats in human beings. So in this particular case, in the stomach, once again, it will be churned overall, creating a chyme, and then it will move on into a small intestine, and then it will go through the small intestine. This is where most of the digestion and absorption occurs. Couple of things will be leading to the small intestine as well. First of all, the gallbladder will release bile into the small intestine, and there will be a pancreas, the very important gland, which is located kind of under the stomach, and it will be producing the exocrine part of the pancreas, will be producing enzymes to send it into the small intestine. And then there is an endocrine part of the pancreas, and we'll talk about that today a little bit more. So yeah, here we go. Accessory organs. So liver produces bile. It produces bile stored in the gallbladder, and then the gallbladder sends the bile into a small intestine. What the bile does, it's not really digesting fats. No. It helps, fats are, if you ever seen it, it comes in the blobs, right? Kind of. So what it will help is emulsification. Take the blob of fat and break it down into a smaller blobs. Why? Smaller blobs overall will have a higher surface area. Higher surface area, faster digestion. They will the faster the digest. They can be digested. Make sense? So bile helps with emulsification, taking the big blob of fat and breaking down into a much smaller blobs of fat, so the enzymes can break it down. And again, not all of the fats will be digested by our organism. At some point of time, I think McDonald's, I might be wrong, it could be a Burger King, but one of the large, I almost certain it's McDonald's, but you can double check online. They had a genius idea. Whenever you're frying those particular burger patties, lots of fat, and fat is not good. Well, excess fat is not good for you. So they were thinking about coming up with some sort of more healthier burger, because they were getting a really bad rap of being unhealthy. So somebody come up with the idea, let's use the fat to fry those particular burger patties, which humans cannot digest. meaning the fat goes in, goes through the digestive system, comes out, everything is fine, right? Well, yeah, the general idea was good. So we're not getting those particular calories from fat. Everything was fine, but then they actually had to cancel that particular wonderful idea, because that particular fat, which has not been digested, goes through the intestine, and what was the term? There was a specific, uncontrollable anal leakage. That particular fat will go through the anus without you going to the restroom, basically, uncontrollably. And of course, it will not smell very nice, and it will not look really nice going through the digestive system. So yeah, they had to stop that. So going back to the gallbladder, I kind of digress a little bit. So in this particular case, bile helps with emulsification, and then there will be a specific enzymes generally produced by your pancreas, which will attack and break down the fats. And then, of course, yes, pancreas produces pancreatic juices, and the pancreatic juices, this is where we have tons of different digestive enzymes and bicarbonate buffer. Bicarbonate buffer helps with the switching from a highly acidic environment of the stomach into the basic pH of the small intestine. All right. So now layers. If you'll take pretty much any part of the digestive tract, let's say esophagus, and you will cut the esophagus open like this, it will have several major layers, or in this particular case, it's probably the small intestine. It will have the inner layer, second layer, third layer, and the fourth layer. And those particular layers, known as the mucosa, the inner ones, epithelial tissues, which will line up the interior of the lumen, what the lumen is. Think about any kind of tube, right? Let's say a digestive tube. Whenever you're cutting out that particular opening where the food goes, right here, this is the lumen. Today in the lab, you will see the picture, well, you will see the images of the small intestine, and that will ask you to label lumen. So let's say I have a tube right here, right? That's the hood from the lens. So in this particular case, well, the tube, that particular opening right there, this, my hand is in the lumen of that particular hood, so to speak. So mucosa produces mucus for sliding down, and then of course all kinds of enzymes, etc. Then the submucosa is basically a connective tissue. So epithelial tissue, then we're talking about the connective tissue. Connective tissue connects it to the next layer known as the muscularis, and I guess you can figure it out what it has. It has several major smooth layers of muscles. Circular one, which can increase or decrease the size of the lumen, and then the longitudinal ones, which can contract and move that particular food or part of the part called bolus of food down in a very specific way, right? And then of course serosa, the outermost, generally the epithelium, covering the external surfaces, and it's called serosa because it produces also kind of liquid. So internal organs, whenever they are sliding past each other, will not chafe whenever you, let's say, are running. Whenever you're running, all of those internal organs kind of rubbing against each other. So serosa producing a special liquid to prevent the chafing or internal chafing. So here's how it looks like. You can see the mucosa, and you will see that particular something which known as a villi with a microvilli. Those particular extension, why they are important, to drastically increase surface area. Higher the surface area, more food can be processed, so to speak. More enzymes can be produced, more food particles can be attacked and broken down and then absorbed. Larger the surface area, faster the reaction. And here we're talking about the digestion and then later on absorption. Then we have a connective tissue known as the mucosa, submucosa, and then we have the layers of muscles, which is a muscularis, and then the outer one is the serosa. Okay, and somewhere between the submucosa and the muscularis, this is where we have the nerves, etc., and so on. So mouth and teeth, many of the vertebrates, specifically mammals, will have different types of the teeth used for grabbing the prey, holding to the prey, and then chewing of that particular prey. Well, birds do not have them. They lack teeth, or at least modern birds. The ancient birds had the teeth, but teeth are overall very heavy, and of course, the birds are very well designed for flying. Instead of that particular mastication, breaking down the pieces into smaller pieces to increase the surface area, they have something which is known as a gizzard. Gizzard is a muscular part of kind of stomach. Usually they have also, some of the birds will have a little bit, kind of tiny little bitty stones in there. So whenever, let's say, food of some sort, let's say grains coming in, those particular walls of the muscular walls will start contracting, and they will be grinding whatever the food is in there. And of course, it passed already stomach, so they already had some kind of pre-digestion going on. And then, of course, you can buy those gizzards, like chicken gizzards, in some of the stores, and the fried are pretty good because, once again, you're eating fairly muscular part. So, dentition, the teeth. Carnivores generally will have a pointing teeth, which lacking a flat or grinding surfaces. Pointy teeth, they need to tear the flesh apart. Herbivores, on the other hand, they need to grind the cellulose, chew and chew and chew. Remember, we were talking about the gorilla. Has a very large canine, but most of the teeth are very flat because for about 20 hours out of 24 a day, gorilla chew. It's a herbivore creature. It have to chew almost constantly in order to break down that particular cellulose. Cellulose is really hard to break down. And then, of course, humans, kind of in between the carnivores and herbivores, we are omnivores. And I think the picture shows you. So here we're looking at the herbivores. So incisors are not very sharp, while in carnivores, the incisors are very sharp. Then, of course, we have the canines. Even though it's a lion, right? It's canine. So anyway, so canines we have, but not as big as, let's say, my dog has a bigger canines than I am, even though it's, well, it's smaller, about twice as small weight-wise as me. Well, 2.5 times smaller than I am. And then, of course, those particular premolars and molars are very pointy to tear the flesh apart. On another hand, those guys will have a very flat surfaces similar to us. So we are omnivores. We have a sharp incisors, we have a canines, and then we have kind of somewhat flat molars and the pointy premolars. All right, so we are designed, humans, design, and this is where, like, well, meat eaters or being a vegan. Vegan is a very if you can maintain veganism for extended period of time, once again, you have to be very careful with what you're eating, but generally it's more ecology friendly, I guess, or nature friendly way to eat. However, we, by the design of creator, nature, or whatever, we're designed to eat our digestive system, our teeth, designed to eat both the animal and the plant products. All right, so saliva inside of the mouth, tongue mixes with the saliva, moisten and lubricates the food. Very important. You might heard about that particular trick when you're trying to swallow the spoonful of cinnamon, right? Don't try it. No, you will not be able to, because you have to moisten, and the cinnamon, especially the ground cinnamon, will absorb everything, and some of those pieces will start ended up in your trachea. You'll start coughing. It's a mess. So don't do that. So also saliva has the amylase. As soon as you say ase, it's some sort of protein, some sort of enzyme, protease. The enzyme breaking down the protein. Amylase will be breaking down some of the starch. If you'll chew some sort of starchy food, you will feel soon it will become kind of slightly sweetish, and therefore, once again, starch, glucose molecules will combine together. Amylase goes and break it down, releasing the glucose, and the glucose can be absorbed straight from the mouth, essentially. Anybody heard about the candies? We just had the Halloween. My little kid went around the neighborhood and he got like, I think, like 15 pounds of candies. Yeah, a huge bag, and it's heavy. So anyway, the candies, a type of the candies known as the Smarties. Anybody? Yes, we are omnivores. So in this particular case, everybody heard about the Smarties? Smarties, like kind of like a tablet-looking, semi-sweet candies. Anybody knows why they're called Smarties? Anybody? Just out of curiosity, if you know, please type it in. Tell me why. Because I have the hypothesis. It's not a scientific theory or anything like that. It's my hypothesis, but I think it's kind of nice, and I will share it with you. Smarties. And I don't know if it's the actual truth or not, so don't quote me on that. It's just my hypothesis. I might be wrong, I might be right. But the Smarties are those particular tablets are made out of pretty much pure glucose, blood sugar. We don't need to digest them. Meaning what? Whenever you're chewing on a Smartie right away, it's not, well, it goes through your mouth, into your stomach, etc. But on the way there, starting from your mouth, starting from the cheeks, it starts getting absorbed straight into the bloodstream. It's small enough to get absorbed and get into the brain. You might not get really smart because of that, but it definitely will bring glucose, or is the blood sugar, which will provide the energy for the brain. So you might, well, at least your brain will have energy. I guess that's why it's called Smarties, because it's providing the energy to your brain. At least I'm thinking it is. It's kind of nice hypothesis. So technically, you can basically crush the Smarties and start snorting. I'm not saying you need to do that, but again, it will get into the upper respiratory system and will get absorbed straight into the bloodstream and will feed your brain. So tasting, smelling, and even thinking or talking about the food stimulates increased salivation. You probably experienced that whenever you smell something. Yesterday, day before, on Monday, I had to take care of my wife's car. She had a nail in her tire, and I was walking down the street to the discount tire. Well, actually, I dropped off the car, and then I was walking. It's not a very long walk, but I was walking from the discount tire to my house. And whenever you're passing, and it was about 11-ish, after, well, in the morning, almost noon, so you can see all of those tiny little bitty restaurants, and we have quite a few of them along the street I was walking. You can smell each one of them, and you're like, Chick-fil-A, for example, and that one was some sort of subs, etc. You can smell the different food, and then again, of course, it will it will increase the salivation. Or whenever you're watching some sort of food show, whenever they are showing you a really nice bubbling steaks, or the cheese which is melting on the pizzas in the advertising to get you to order it right away. So yeah. Anyway, swallowing generally starts as a voluntarily action, but then everything after you swallowed, getting as soon as the bolus of food get into the esophagus, it moves without our thing. So the food is ready to be swallowed, tongue moves back in the mouth, and soft palate seals the nasal cavity, so the food will not get into your nasal cavity. And then there is something which known as the glottis. Glottis will be pushed against the epiglottis, closing down the respiratory tract, so the food will not get into the windpipe. Let me kind of show. This is what essentially happens. See right here. The soft palate will be pressed against, so the food will not get into the nasal passages. On another hand, that particular thing known as the epiglottis, right? Epi on top. Glottis is basically the opening right here. So in this particular case, whenever you're swallowing, the epiglottis closes down the trachea and let the food swallow into the esophagus. So we have the trachea and the esophagus right behind it. So in this particular case, whenever you the swallowing, it's basically two things. The soft palate will close down the nasal cavities, and the epiglottis will go on top of the glottis, letting the food slide down. And of course, any kind of things, whenever you're talking and drinking at the same time, you might end up with a drink, or God forbid, food get into your trachea. Then you start coughing, saying that food got into the wrong pipe. And you can see that here is the food, kind of brownish color. Then whenever it's being swallowed, the epiglottis closed, the food passes into the esophagus, and it's not being pushed up into the nasal cavities. All right. And of course, you might heard about that the kids, if you are feeding kids with the grapes, you better to cut them in half, because the size of the grape might go past the epiglottis and close down the entrance into the trachea, and this is where the person will start suffocating because it cannot breathe in, since the cherry or grape, any kind of round food, might ended up lodging right here, completely closing down the trachea. As a result, you have to squeeze the person for them to spit that particular piece of food out. Anyway, esophagus, muscular tube, there is no essentially digestion occurs there. It's basically taking the food from the mouth into the stomach. It moves the bolus of food through the peristaltis, the contraction, which we don't think of. And in most of the cases, we do not be able to control it, even though 10 or so years ago, on a smaller kind of sideshow in Las Vegas, I believe, there was a gentleman who would show you balls, metallic balls, and he would swallow them, 3 or 4 of them, and then he will jump, and you can kind of hear. Once again, it was a small, I don't really remember which casino it was in, but it was a smaller kind of room size show, so not a huge show. And he would jump, and you can hear those particular balls kind of hitting each other in his stomach, and then he would turn around and do whatever he was doing. Basically, he would compress his stomach, so those balls will go back into the esophagus. He would reverse movement of the peristaltis, which is generally not happening, and then he would spit out those particular balls, which were just in his stomach. Yeah, I know. It's kind of, from the biology point of view, my wife didn't like it. From biology point of view, it was very interesting. So anyway, but generally it goes through the peristaltis, and that's the one directional wave of contraction. Whenever the stomach, whenever the esophagus meeting the stomach, there will be something which known as the sphincter, right? Sphincter is basically a muscular round ring which will close down to prevent the backflow. We technically lack of the true sphincter. There is a sphincter there. However, it's not a very strong one, let's put it this way. That's why most of us, if not all of us, at some point of time experience something which known as the heartburn. What heartburn is? The stomach content, for whatever reason, will be slowly getting up into the esophagus. All right? So they will pass that particular sphincter, that closing. For example, eating too much of the oily food or fatty food might happen that the sphincter will not close down fully, so the food will be able to creep down, well, up actually into esophagus. And remember, the stomach content is highly acidic. The cells of the stomach are protected by a special layer of mucus. The cells of the esophagus do not. So what's happening? That particular acid will be literally burning, chemically burning those particular cells. Hence the name, a burn. But it's located right next to the heart, and this is where our stomach is basically contacting to the esophagus. So hence the name heartburn. It's not really your heart burning, it's technically esophagus burn, but kind of gives you the idea. So here we have, remember we had the muscularis. In the muscularis we have the round rings of the muscles which will kind of close it down, and then the longitudinal muscles which will push it back. So peristaltis, and we do not think about it, smooth muscles not under overall conscious control. Stomach, sac-like portions, again, swallows can expand, has a third layer kind of crossing. So we had two, and then there will be a third layer to mix it up. So there is a mucus secreting cells, and then something which known as the parietal cells. Those ones secrete hydrochloric acid. And then there is a chief cells which produce a special enzyme, pepsinogens, which is an inactive form of the enzyme known as a pepsin. And with a highly acidic environment, it will activate, it will get activated, and it will start, not completely, but start digesting the enzymes. So here what we have, so we have esophageal sphincter, again, not the very strongest one, and this is where we have, well, the stomach is, and again we have in a cross section we see those particular gastric pits. This is where the gastric glands will be produced, but all of them are covered by a special mucus to protect those cells. Now those mucus cells will be producing mucus to protect those cells from the being killed by the hydrochloric acid. And then of course we have a special bacteria, right? You might heard about that, which might if you're under stress and not have enough, well, don't have proper nutrition, etc. So those bacteria might start living in the stomach, and they will destroy the mucus. By destroying the mucus, they expose the cells to the hydrochloric acid, and the hydrochloric acid will slowly start eating its way through the stomach wall, and that particular thing known as the ulcer, right? And then at some point of time, it is possible for the ulcer left untreated might ended up going through, and then all of that particular liquid, partially digested food, and then of course hydrochloric acid will be spilling into the body cavity, and then of course that will lead to the death of the patient. But nowadays we know what's causing it. Again, stressful situation and a very specific bacteria. Broad spectrum antibiotics can help with that. So inside of the stomach, again, low pH help in denaturing of the proteins, activates the pepsin, so pepsinogen turns into a pepsin. Not much of the digestion of the carbohydrates or the fats. Again, the pepsin will start working on the proteins, but it will not finish them. Some of the water might get absorbed, specifically aspirin, smaller molecules, alcohol will be absorbed, and then it will move where? Through the stomach into the liver, and liver will try to detoxify that. But alcohol, again, small molecule enough to start absorbing straight from your mouth. So a mixture, partially digested food, those the ones are known as the chyme. We already talked about that. Peptic ulcer, again, we'll talk about that. And then if we have the pyloric sphincter, is the sphincter at the bottom of the stomach. So in this particular case, the food goes and then enters the first part of the small intestine known as the duodenum. So in this case, some of the little ones, newborns, might have a pyloric sphincter completely closed down and not letting the food in. As a result, I don't really remember what that particular condition is, but what happens that the little ones getting the milk goes to the stomach, and then it cannot go through. So they will throw up and they're losing the weight, etc. So in this particular case, generally just a little bit of jolt of electricity will start the pyloric sphincter. In some cases you have to go through the operation, but generally two electrodes specifically placed near the pyloric sphincter will make sure that those particular ring of muscles are working properly. So anyway, small intestine about 4.5 meters long. So technically it's a long intestine. I really detest that particular name, small and large intestine, because some of the students saying, well, if it's a large, I have to be the largest one, diameter wise, not the length wise. Small intestine should be called a long intestine, while the large intestine should be called as a short intestine or thick intestine. But in this particular case, this is the longest part of the digestive system. And remember, this is where most of the digestion as well as most of the absorption will occur, specifically nutrients, amino acids, carbohydrates, and the fatty acids. So about 4.5 meters long. 4.5 meters long is roughly 4.5, almost 5 yards. So we're talking about 15 or so feet long. Smallest in diameter, consists of different parts that we already talked about. The duodenum, that's the beginning one, then the jejunum, which is the majority of that particular one, and then ileum is the part where the small intestine merges with or opens into a large intestine, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Receives the chyme from the stomach, changing the pH with the help of the pancreas. Also, pancreas provides the digestive enzymes and the bile from the liver in order to emulsify the fats. So let's take a look. Let me finish. I'll finish within 5 minutes or so. So inside of the small intestine, epithelial walls covered with the villi. Remember those particular all of those invagination. So, and then villi will be covered by the microvilli to greatly increase surface area, to increase the digestion rates and the absorption rate. Okay, participate in the digestion of absorption, increasing the surface area, increase the rate of digestion and absorption. Okay. So many adults lack the enzyme of lactase. We just talk about the lactose intolerance. And this is what we have in the cross section of the intestine. So we're looking at the villi, those particular kind of hair-like projections. And on the villi, we have a smaller kind of villi known as the microvilli, right? Drastically increase surface area for faster absorption and the digestion. Absorption, we already talked about the amino acids and monosaccharide. This is after the, of course, the, let's say, protein has been broken down. And all of those particular get through the epithelial wall into the blood, and blood takes it straight to the hepatic portal vein, meaning it will go straight into the liver, the largest organ we have. Why? What's the major function of the liver besides producing bile? Detoxify, stop. Whatever the toxins you're getting, the liver is the first layer of, level of protection for our organism. If you are, and I'm not saying you need to, but whenever a person drinks alcohol, what happens? Alcohol gets into the blood, goes into the liver. Liver is the first target organ for the alcohol, and lots of consumption of the alcohol might lead to the cancer of liver, cirrhosis. The second part, or second target organ for the alcohol, of course, is the brain, and that's the reason why some people are like to drink, because it's alters the perception of the world by acting on the special receptors inside of our brain, so to speak. So fatty acids, we already talked about that the fats will broken down into the fatty acids and monoglyceride, resembles into a triglycerides, and so on and so forth. So in this particular case, almost all fluid will be reabsorbed in the small intestine, and it will be going into the liver. So here what we're looking, proteins being digested, broken down into the amino acids. Amino acids will be transported into the blood capillary. Same thing, carbohydrate, disaccharide, monosaccharides such as glucose will be moved in. Same thing with the proteins. Remember, we have a bile which will take the blob of fat and they will attach and broken down into smaller ones, and smaller ones, now free fatty acids, will be digested and will be moved into the lymphatic capillaries now, and then this is where all of that will be circulating throughout the body, essentially, after passing the liver, of course. The large intestine, you know what, I'll stop right here. We'll continue on that next time.